There are things a man keeps to himself. Things he buries so deep that even in the mirror, he can't recognize the weight they've carved into his face. I'm 55 years old now, and for the last 18 years, I've carried a secret that would sound like madness if I spoke it aloud. But tonight, sitting in this cabin with the wind howling through the pines like it always has, I'm going to tell you what happened in these woods. Not because I want forgiveness and not because I expect you to believe me. I'm telling you because the silence has become heavier than the truth ever could be. My name is John Weaver, and I used to be a park ranger in the Allagash wilderness of Northern Maine. Before everything changed, my life was simple in the way that solitary lives often are. I patrolled 40,000 acres of forest, maintained trails, checked on campsites, and spent most of my time alone with the trees and the rivers. My wife had left me 6 years before the incident. Said she couldn't compete with the silence I preferred over conversation. She wasn't wrong. After the divorce, I requested the most remote station I could find, and they gave me a cabin 12 miles from the nearest logging road. I told myself I was running toward something, but looking back I know I was running away. The cabin was small but solid. One room with a wood stove, a cot, a table, and shelves lined with field guides and maps. No electricity, no phone. Just kerosene lamps and a radio that crackled with weather reports twice a day. I'd wake before dawn, make coffee on the stove, and head out into wilderness that stretched in every direction like an ocean of spruce and birch. In summer, the mosquitoes were biblical. In winter, the cold cut through every layer you owned. But there was a peace in it, a rhythm that made sense when nothing else did. I'd see maybe 3 or 4 people a month during hiking season, fewer in winter. Mostly, it was just me and the animals. Moose, black bears, the occasional lynx, and the wolves whose howls echoed through the valleys at night. I was 42 when I first heard something that didn't belong. It was late November, and the first real snow had fallen, 8 inches overnight, turning the forest into something pristine and silent. I was checking a line of trail markers about 5 miles northeast of my cabin when I heard it. A sound like grinding metal mixed with something organic, something in pain. It came from deep in a ravine where the old-growth hemlock grew so thick that even in daylight, the forest floor stayed in permanent twilight. The sound stopped as suddenly as it started, leaving only the soft whisper of snow falling through branches. Every instinct I had told me to turn around, head back to the cabin, log the anomaly and forget about it. But I didn't. I've asked myself 1,000 times why I didn't. I made my way down into the ravine, my boots breaking through the snow crust with each step. The temperature had dropped, and my breath came out in thick clouds that hung in the still air. The hemlocks rose around me like cathedral columns, and the snow muffled every sound except my own heartbeat. Then I saw the tracks. They were massive, easily twice the size of my own boot prints, with elongated toes that ended in what looked like claws. But it was the gait that stopped me cold. The stride was too long, the pattern too deliberate. Whatever made these tracks walked upright, and it was heavy enough to sink deep into the snow even where the crust was thickest. I followed the tracks for maybe 200 yards, my rifle unslung and ready, though I had no idea what I was preparing for. That's when I found the deer. Or what was left of it. The carcass had been torn apart with a violence that went beyond predation. Ribs jutted out at wrong angles, and the snow around it was churned and stained dark. But what struck me wasn't the kill itself. Wolves and bears could be brutal. It was the waste. Most of the meat was still there untouched. Whatever killed this deer hadn't been hunting for food. It had been killing out of rage or pain or something I couldn't name. Then I heard it again. That grinding, agonized sound, closer now, coming from a cluster of boulders about 50 yards ahead. I should have run. Every cell in my body was screaming at me to run. But I was a ranger, and rangers don't run from animals, no matter how strange the situation. I moved forward slowly, my rifle raised, until I could see into the space between the boulders. And that's when I saw it. The Wendigo. I didn't know what to call it then. Didn't have a name for what my eyes were struggling to process. It was hunched in the narrow space between 2 rocks, and even folded in on itself, it was enormous. 8 feet tall at least, maybe more. Its body was gaunt, skeletal, covered in patchy fur that might have once been gray but was now matted with dried blood and debris. The skin beneath showed through in places, stretched tight over bone, grayish-white like something that had been buried and dug up. But it was the head that froze me in place. An elongated skull that was almost cervine, almost human, but neither. Antlers rose from its crown, massive and branching, some points broken off, others grown through the skull at angles that looked painful. And its eyes, sunken deep in the skull, found mine. For a moment, we simply stared at each other. I waited for it to charge, to attack, to do whatever monsters do when cornered. But it didn't move. It just looked at me with those hollow eyes, and then it made that sound again, that terrible grinding groan, and I realized it wasn't threatening me. It was suffering. Its left foreleg was twisted at an unnatural angle, the joint swollen to twice its normal size, and when it shifted its weight, I could see the shattered bone pressing against the skin. The injury was old, infected, and in the cold, I could smell the rot even from where I stood. I don't know how long we stayed like that, locked in that impossible moment. Long enough for my hands to start shaking. Long enough for the light to begin fading. Then, slowly, I lowered my rifle. The creature watched me do it, and something in those eyes shifted. Not gratitude, not quite, but maybe recognition. An acknowledgement that I wasn't going to kill it. I backed away carefully, keeping my eyes on it until I was far enough to turn and walk quickly back toward my cabin. I didn't run, but it took everything I had not to. That night, I couldn't sleep. I sat by the wood stove with my rifle across my lap, listening to every sound the forest made. I told myself I'd imagined it, that exhaustion or isolation had finally caught up with me. But I knew better. I'd seen something real, something that shouldn't exist but did. And the worst part, the part that kept me awake until dawn, was that I couldn't stop thinking about the pain in those eyes. About the way it had looked at me not like a monster, but like something that needed help and knew it wouldn't receive it. 3 days passed before I went back. 3 days of pacing my cabin, of starting to write incident reports I couldn't finish, of lying awake at night hearing that grinding, agonized sound in my memory. I told myself I was checking to make sure it had moved on, that it wasn't a threat to any late-season hikers. But that was a lie. The truth was simpler and more complicated. I couldn't leave something in that much pain alone in the woods, even if that something was a creature that shouldn't exist. I brought supplies this time. Medical supplies, mostly. Antiseptics, bandages, antibiotics from the emergency kit, though I had no idea if any of it would help or if I was just losing my mind. I also brought food, dried venison, some canned goods, and a large thermos of hot broth. The rational part of my brain kept asking what the hell I thought I was doing, but I'd stopped listening to that voice somewhere around the second sleepless night. The creature was still there, wedged between those same boulders. In the daylight, it looked worse. The infection in its leg had spread, darkening the skin around the joint, and the smell of decay was stronger. It was weaker, too. When I approached, it lifted its head but didn't try to move away. Up close, I could see details I'd missed before. The way its ribs stood out sharply beneath the patchy fur, the raw places where it had scraped against the rocks, the way its breathing came in shallow, labored gasps that clouded the frozen air. I set down my pack slowly, talking to it the way I used to talk to injured animals when I was younger, working at a wildlife rehabilitation center downstate. Easy now. I'm not going to hurt you. Just want to help if I can. My voice sounded absurd in that silent forest, but the creature's eyes tracked my movements, alert but not aggressive. I took out the thermos first, poured some broth into the cap, and set it down a few feet away. The Wendigo stared at it for a long moment, then slowly, painfully, extended its neck to lap at the liquid. The sound it made, something between relief and sorrow, nearly broke me. Over the next hour, I worked as carefully as I could. I couldn't get close enough to treat the leg directly, but I left bandages soaked in antiseptic near where it could reach them, along with the antibiotics crushed into more broth. It was primitive, probably useless, but it was all I had. The creature watched everything I did with an intelligence that was unmistakable. This wasn't an animal. This was something else, something caught between worlds, suffering in a way that went beyond just physical pain. I came back every day after that. At first, I told myself it was just until the creature recovered enough to move on. But days turned into weeks and weeks into months, and somewhere in that time, My fear transformed into something I didn't have a name for. The infection in its leg slowly began to heal, though the limb would never be right again. The creature would always walk with a heavy limp, and I knew that in the wild, that meant it couldn't hunt effectively. So I brought food. Deer that I shot specifically for it, rabbits, fish from the river. I'd leave the carcasses near the boulders, and they'd be gone by the next day. We developed a routine, the Wendigo and I. I'd arrive in the late afternoon, when the light was starting to fail. I'd check its leg, bring food, sometimes just sit on a fallen log 20 feet away and talk. I talked about everything, about my ex-wife, about the loneliness that had driven me into these woods, about the beauty and brutality of the wilderness I'd dedicated my life to protecting. The creature never responded, of course, but it listened. I could see it in the way its head would tilt slightly, the way those deep-set eyes would focus on me with an attention that felt almost human. By the end of winter, the Wendigo could move around the ravine, though it never went far. And I'd become someone I didn't recognize, a man who spent more time with a legendary monster than with his own species, who lied in his ranger reports about his patrol routes, who had built his entire life around protecting something the world said couldn't exist. I knew it was unsustainable. I knew it was dangerous, maybe even insane. But for the first time in years, I didn't feel alone. And neither, I think, did the creature. That's when everything changed. It was early March, the snow starting to soften into slush, when I arrived at the ravine and found I wasn't alone. An old man stood near the boulders where the Wendigo sheltered, dressed in heavy wool and furs that looked like they belonged to another century. He was Native American. I could see it in his features, in the way he stood, and he was speaking softly in a language I didn't understand. The Wendigo was watching him with an intensity I'd never seen before, its massive head lowered, its body trembling. I must have made a noise, because the old man turned to look at me. His face was deeply lined, weathered by decades of harsh winters, but his eyes were sharp and clear. "You're the one who's been feeding it," he said. It wasn't a question. His English was accented but perfect, each word chosen with care. "You're the one who stopped it from dying." I didn't know what to say. My hand moved instinctively to my rifle, but something in his posture, calm, unthreatening, made me pause. "Who are you?" I finally managed. "My name is Joseph Caldwell," he said. "My people are Maliseet. We've lived in these forests for thousands of years, long before they were called Maine, long before men like you came to protect them." He gestured toward the Wendigo. "And we've known about creatures like this for just as long. I'm what you might call a spiritual guardian, though that's an imperfect translation. In my language, the word means something closer to one who maintains balance between the worlds." He moved closer to me, and I could see details now. The medicine bundle hanging from his belt, the tattoos on his weathered hands, the way he carried himself with the quiet authority of someone who had walked these woods longer than I'd been alive. "This one," he continued, nodding toward the creature, "has been suffering for a long time. Longer than you know. The Wendigo are not what the stories say, not entirely. They're not demons or spirits of greed. They're something more complicated. They're transformation itself. What happens when hunger and isolation and despair twist a human soul so completely that it can't find its way back?" I felt something cold settle in my stomach. "You're saying it was human?" "Once," Joseph said quietly. "Long ago. Before it forgot its name, before it forgot everything except the pain." He looked back at the creature, and there was something like sadness in his eyes. "I've been tracking this one for 3 years. I felt it when it crossed into this territory, felt the wrongness of it. But when I finally found it 2 months ago, I saw something I didn't expect. It wasn't hunting anymore. It wasn't killing out of hunger or rage. It was just existing, surviving, because someone had shown it a different way." He turned back to me, and in his gaze I saw both judgment and approval. "You didn't know what you were doing, did you? You just saw something in pain and couldn't walk away." "I'm a ranger," I said, though the words felt hollow. "It's my job to protect the wildlife in these woods." "This isn't wildlife," Joseph said. "But you're right, it needed protecting. And now it's time for me to finish what you started." Joseph Caldwell stayed in the forest for 6 weeks. He made camp a half-mile from the ravine, and every day he'd visit the Wendigo, performing rituals I didn't understand with herbs and smoke and quiet songs in his language that seemed to make the very air around us change. At first, I was wary of him. Protective, maybe, though I wasn't sure if I was protecting the creature or myself. But as the days passed, I came to understand that Joseph wasn't there to harm anything. He was there to heal something that went deeper than the physical injury I'd been treating. He taught me things during those weeks that changed how I saw everything. We'd sit by my wood stove in the evenings, drinking bitter coffee, and he'd tell me stories about the Wendigo that bore no resemblance to the horror tales I'd heard. The old ones say that the Wendigo sickness comes from a breaking, he explained one night, his weathered hands wrapped around a tin cup. A breaking so complete that the person forgets they were ever human. It happens in the deepest winter, when someone is alone and starving and desperate, and they make a choice that seems like survival but is really a surrender to something darker. Once that threshold is crossed, there's usually no way back. The body changes, the mind changes, until there's nothing left but hunger and rage. But this one is different, I said, thinking of the way the creature had looked at me that first day. Not with hunger, but with something that felt almost like hope. Joseph nodded slowly. This one remembered something. Maybe it was the pain that kept it tethered, kept it from losing itself completely. Or maybe it was something else, some fragment of who it used to be that refused to let go. When you showed it mercy instead of fear, when you treated it like something worth saving, you reminded it that there was another way to exist. You gave it a choice it thought it had lost. I thought about that for a long time, staring into the orange glow of the wood stove. Can you help it? I finally asked. Can you change it back? Joseph's expression grew complicated. Part sadness, part resignation. The transformation is too complete for that. The body has changed too much, been this way for too long. But what I can do is help it find peace. Help it remember enough of its humanity that the pain stops being the only thing it knows. That's why I'm here. That's what the rituals are for. Over the following weeks, I watched something extraordinary happen. The Wendigo began to change. Not in body, but in presence. The rage that had always simmered beneath its suffering seemed to drain away, replaced by a kind of quiet dignity. It moved differently, held itself differently. Joseph said the creature was remembering itself, piecing together fragments of the person it had been before the transformation. He never told me who that person was, and I never asked. Some secrets are too heavy to share. But there were complications. Other people were starting to notice things. A group of hunters had found tracks near the northern boundary of my patrol area and were talking about organizing an expedition. Local news had picked up the story. Nothing serious yet, just speculation about a possible large bear or a hoax, but it was enough to make me nervous. And then there was my supervisor, who'd started asking questions about why I'd been spending so much time in one section of the wilderness, why my reports had become vague and minimal. Joseph noticed my worry. This can't last, he said one evening, stating what we both knew. Eventually, someone will find it. And when they do, they won't see what you see. They'll see a monster and they'll kill it without hesitation. So what do we do? I asked, though I already knew there were no good answers. There's a place, Joseph said slowly, deep in the territories to the north, beyond where the maps end, where my people still maintain the old ways. The creature could live there protected, hidden. It would mean leaving everything you know, leading it on a journey that would take weeks and would be dangerous for all of us. But it would be safe there. Finally safe. I looked at him across the dim cabin. You're asking me to abandon my post. My job. Everything. I'm asking you to finish what you started, Joseph replied. You saved its life. Now save its existence. The decision should have been harder than it was. I should have thought about my pension, my responsibilities, the life I'd built even if it was a lonely one. But sitting there in that cabin, with the wind howling through the pines like it always had, I realized that life was already gone. It had been gone since the moment I chose not to pull the trigger, since the moment I saw pain in those hollow eyes and recognized it as something I understood. I'd already crossed a line I couldn't uncross. 2 weeks later, we left. I wrote a resignation letter citing health issues and left it on my supervisor's desk. I packed what I could carry, destroyed what I couldn't, and on a cold April morning when the last snow was melting into the rivers, the three of us headed north. An old Maliseet spiritual guardian, a disgraced park ranger, and a creature that shouldn't exist, walking through forests that stretched beyond the edge of any map. The journey took 23 days. We traveled at night when we could, avoiding roads and towns and any place where we might be seen. Joseph knew paths that hadn't been used in generations, game trails and river routes that the modern world had forgotten. The Wendigo moved slowly, its injured leg making the travel painful, but it never complained, never faltered. And somewhere in those long nights of walking beneath stars that seemed close enough to touch, I realized something. I wasn't afraid anymore. Not of the creature, not of what I'd done, not of what would come next. For the first time in my adult life, I was exactly where I needed to be. We reached the Northern Territories on a morning when the sun rose over forests that looked like they'd existed since the beginning of time. Joseph led us to a valley so remote that I doubted any white person had ever seen it. A place where streams ran clear over ancient stone and the trees grew in ways that suggested no one had ever cut them. "This is it," he said simply. "This is where it can rest." I spent 3 more days there, helping Joseph complete the final rituals, watching as the Wendigo explored its new home with something that might have been wonder. On the last night, I sat near the creature one final time, the way I had so many times in that ravine in Maine. "I don't know if you understand me," I said quietly. "I don't know if you remember being human, or if you even want to. But I want you to know that you mattered. That you changed me. That saving you saved something in me I didn't know was dying." The creature looked at me with those deep-set eyes, and in the firelight, I could see something in them I'd never seen before. Something that might have been gratitude or peace, or simply acknowledgement that we'd walked this strange path together and survived it. I left the next morning. Joseph stayed. He said his work wasn't finished, that the creature would need guidance as it settled into this new existence. We shook hands at the edge of the valley. 2 men who'd shared something that no one else would ever believe or understand. "What will you do now?" he asked. "I don't know," I admitted. "Find another forest, I suppose. Start over somewhere no one knows my name." Joseph smiled slightly. "You'll carry this with you wherever you go. The weight of it. The wonder of it. The knowledge that the world is stranger and more complicated than most people will ever know." He paused. "That's not a burden. It's a gift." I've thought about those words many times in the years since. I'm 55 now, living in a cabin not unlike the one I left, working odd jobs that keep me in the wilderness where I belong. I never saw the Wendigo again, and I never tried to. Some stories don't need endings, they just need to be told, so the silence doesn't win. People talk about monsters like they're simple things, evil or good, dangerous or safe. But the truth is more complicated. The truth is that sometimes the most monstrous thing is the isolation that creates monsters in the first place. And sometimes the most human thing we can do is see past the horror to the suffering beneath it, and choose mercy when fear would be easier. I don't know if the creature is still alive. I don't know if it found the peace Joseph promised. But I know that for 18 years I've carried this secret like a stone in my chest, and tonight, finally, I've set it down. Not because I need forgiveness, I'm not sure I deserve it, but because the world needs to know that compassion doesn't have boundaries, that humanity isn't limited to human beings, and that sometimes the greatest act of courage is to help something everyone else would destroy. The wind is picking up outside my cabin now, whistling through the pines the way it always does. And in that sound, if I listen carefully, I can almost hear that grinding, agonized groan that started everything, transformed now into something else, something that sounds almost like singing, almost like peace. And that's enough. That has to be enough.